Hudson he was just always so cheerful, upbeat, and he always had a smile on his face.
Really happy, really smiley. Nothing really fazed him.
He had an energy that was like no other, upbeat, positive. And even when he might get a little bit down because things hadn't gone the way that he expected them to, 24 hours later, he will have picked himself up, if not before. I think he was born with a smile on his face, and that just continued right the way through into adulthood. And his smile was infectious. It would just radiate joy into anybody that he came across.
He loved sport, anything to do with sport. We went up to Collingwood School, which is in Camberley, and they used to do a sort of entry training session for table tennis. I think we did 2 or 3 sessions, but he found something that he absolutely loved. And so we joined Ash Table Tennis Club, and we played every week. Brilliant time together. They were really good. He used to get quite upset for the first few weeks if he lost a match. But it was obviously he was going to lose because we'd only just joined the league and he'd only just learned how to play table tennis. But every week onwards, he'd push and push and push and push. And he found something that he was good at and he loved. And he was playing with all age groups. I think that one of the guys that was in that Division 4 was 84, 85. And they could still beat him, even though he's 12 and a half, because they'd learnt how to just get the ball back. But Hudson, we called him the smasher because he couldn't play a defensive shot or didn't like playing defensive shots. So he would always attack, always try and smash. The one thing that really works for me or helps me is the fact that I was able to, and lucky enough to be able to spend so much time with him over those years, because it's very difficult. You know, we'd run our own businesses, but we were able to be flexible. So every school event, we were able to go. Every sport event at school, we were able to go. We were always playing golf. We were always playing table tennis. We were always playing tennis. So all of those things, I was able to spend the time. And that's what helps me now in terms of, you know, the difficulties, because at least I've got those good memories of Hudson and how he was and how I'll always remember him.
He worked really hard at school. And, you know, learning didn't come easy, schoolwork-wise, but he had the most amazing memory and he could remember facts. And of course, that came into his own when he became really interested in sport. I think he could possibly tell you every goal that Chelsea had scored over the years, and he could describe how they scored it. He could name every player today and 10 years ago. I remember one time when we went to Wimbledon and we went out into the village at night to get something to eat, and he spotted a football player that was at least 100 yards in front of us from the back. So he had many endearing qualities, but his tenacity to achieve and to do his best, that was evident from a very, very early age, and that followed through to adulthood. And we went to a presentation evening last Saturday, and one of his clubs has actually put together a Hudson Foley Memorial Cup, and they presented it for the first time, and it's for the most inspirational player. And it went to a lovely young lad that so reminded me of Hudson. Very kind, very gentle, but at the end of the day, very passionate and very competitive. And even though he had very giving qualities, he wouldn't let you win at table tennis. And that's going to be an annual award that is given out to a junior player that most represented Hudson's passion and kindness, which that's a really positive thing, and how to remember Hudson. I remember when he decided to go travelling with a couple of mates. The plan was to go to Thailand. So he left on the 20th of February, 2020. and did go to Thailand with a couple of friends.
And then the pandemic hit. So he had a choice, come back here, go to Australia. They were still allowing people in. So he flew to Australia. The guy that he was travelling with decided to come back. So he flew to Australia on his own, spent 2 weeks in quarantine in a hotel completely empty.
Off he went to whatever state he could get into. And he would Google the states that were open, and then he'd make his way to that state. He worked many jobs, fruit picking. He worked at a crocodile farm, feeding crocodiles. He worked down the mine. He didn't really care what job he did, as long as it enabled him to earn money and stay longer. He managed to travel for 2 years during a pandemic. Came back to live here, and we spoke about how he wanted to live his life, and it was very much about, well, I'm working to travel and I'm working to have adventure. And he was a really hard worker. He would work some long hours, especially if he was saving up for something specific. He signed up to a very well-known travel company that specialised in young people's travel, and he signed up to a 3-month programme. A month in Costa Rica, a month in Ecuador, and a month in Peru. The company that he signed up to decided on the accommodation, so it could either be a hostel or homestay. And he would be volunteering in the morning on local projects with other volunteers. And in the afternoon, he would go to Spanish school. And in the evening at weekends, go on trips and adventures with the other volunteers. And so on the 7th of May, his sister and I took him to the airport and waved him goodbye as he went through departures. And I just thought, well, he's going to be back in 3 months and that'll be it.
So he did his month in Costa Rica, then went to Ecuador, stayed with a host family in Ecuador, and absolutely loved it. And then he went to Peru. And he did say that was one of the hardest things he did, because he did the 4-day hike. And he said that was really, really difficult. But he said, Dad, it was absolutely amazing, worth every pain and muscle ache that I had, but it was absolutely fantastic. And that's the sort of positive person he was. It wouldn't matter what he went through, he would be happy and he'd be positive, and he'd want to get involved in the local sort of activity, communities, people. But he loved Ecuador so much, he was actually due to come back after his Peru trip. But because he loved Ecuador so much and he couldn't quite decide what he wanted to do, he decided to go back to Ecuador. And he stayed with the host family for another 3 weeks. And over that 3 weeks, we were talking about, my parents are Irish, I could have got him an Irish passport. He was looking at coming back, doing Europe with an Irish passport so he could work. And wouldn't have the issue since Brexit that we would have. And we were sort of just talking about that and trying to see what we could do and how long it would take and so on and so forth. So that was almost where he was at. And then unfortunately we got the phone call on the 30th of August to say that he'd passed away.
The first I got to hear of Hudson's passing was, I received a phone call about 9:30 that night, UK time, from the owner of the travel company that Hudson had signed up to, who called me to say that Hudson had been found dead in the bathroom, which was an horrendous shock. They didn't know anything more than that.
Yeah, that was a very, very, very difficult phone call. And I came up and I was with Kathy, and then we decided that we were going to go and tell Tasha, my daughter, eldest daughter. And then we drove up to my son, Jordan, up in London, and broke the news to him, and then we all came back.
So the next day I flew to Quito in Ecuador with Hudson's brother. Hudson's sister and dad followed on 4 days later. By the time they arrived, we had been informed that his cause of death was acute pulmonary edema. but we had no idea why. Hudson had no genetic health issues that we knew of. He was fit, healthy, young man of 24. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever. In the lead up to him passing, there was a couple of unusual things that happened. He started to talk about, I'm feeling quite panicky. There are times when I feel my breathing a bit kind of rapid. He fainted a couple of times. This is in the week leading up to him passing. And he had some stomach discomfort. And they were things that were out of character for Hudson. Hudson was pretty laid back.
We didn't actually know it was carbon monoxide for about 8 weeks because they'd done the initial tests and they could tell us why he'd passed, but not what had caused. When we got the final toxicology report, he had 57% carbon monoxide in his body at the time of the autopsy. I believe everybody has carbon monoxide in their body up to about 5%. And if you're a smoker, you can have up to 10, 12%. I think once you get to the 25 level, it's when you start to feel dizzy, can have some issues with it. Once you start going above that, you become unconscious. And then further, you become deceased, unfortunately. And even sometimes if you have that and you still get help, then it can have lasting effects in terms of dependent on how long it's been in your body, what percentage, and so on and so forth.
If I think back to Hudson's kit list that was provided by the company he travelled with, there was no mention on there about the dangers of carbon monoxide. I think if it had been on Hudson's kit list alongside, the hiking boots that cost £150 and the rucksack, which again was probably another £150, I'd have said to him, make sure you buy one. And yeah, for £20, it wouldn't have been a big deal.
I'd much rather have spent 20 quid and had him here now.
What I would say to parents of young travellers and to young travellers, in particular, is take a carbon monoxide alarm with you. There is a travel one that is now available that will be linked to Hudson's Pack Safe appeal. That's to British standard. There is no way that all these accommodations can be policed throughout the world. I cannot fault the family that Hudson stayed with. They looked after him as if he was their own, which is why he went back there. And they knew nothing about carbon monoxide until this tragedy happened. But they now have carbon monoxide alarms in their house. But that won't be for all accommodation. So I really do stress, take a travel alarm, have it out, still attached to your rucksack in the accommodation. And whilst Hudson wouldn't have taken his alarm into the shower, it is thought that it was highly likely that carbon monoxide was leaking into his bedroom, which was next door to the shower room. And if that had been the case, the alarm would have gone off and it could have saved Hudson's life. It's too late for Hudson, but it's not too late for any other young traveller who goes on their adventures.